Let's hope so. Banjo Paterson, A.B. Paterson, is one of Australia's most treasured cultural icons. His works captured the essence of the Australian spirit, as it then was anyway, in the bush at the time.
Yeah, our own Paul Marshall, who else, went to learn a little more about the man behind Waltzing Matilda.
In my wild, erratic fancy, visions come to me of Clancy, gone a-droving down the Cooper where the western drovers go.
So why banjo?
One day I was sitting at work, it was a quiet day, I was looking out the window and the lines from Clancy of The Overflow popped into my head, which is a really whimsical story about Banjo sitting in his office, dreaming he was out in the bush, and it's one of my favourite poems, and I thought, well, I like that, and if I can relate to that, perhaps other people can.
And I somehow rather fancy that I'd like to change with Clancy, like to take a turn at droving, where the seasons come and go.
Paul Terry is the news editor at Prime 7 in Albury.
Someone's going to win a chocolate frog if they come up with a good lead story.
You can always lead with sport.
So
He's written books before about bushrangers, Ned Kelly and Captain Moonlight. Banjo took him 2 years.
We all know him as Banjo, but his friends called him Barty.
yeah, that's right. His christened name was Andrew Barton Paterson. Barton being the famous Australian name of the first Australian Prime Minister, for example, who he was related to. So they called him Barty.
Banjo was the name of a horse they had on a family station when Barty was a boy.
The name must have appealed to him. He started calling himself the Banjo on his poetry, and he probably didn't realise just how much it was going to stick.
So it came from a horse?
It came from a horse.
Banjo was the horse?
It was a racehorse and not a particularly good one.
Banjo, the poet, was a country boy who went to school in Sydney and became a lawyer.
He didn't really enjoy law. He never liked it, partly because he had to try and screw money out of people who, in his words, didn't have any. But he wrote in his spare time, and because he was a little hard up, I think it was partly to make some extra money, but he just, like all great writers, I think he couldn't help himself, and he'd write these poems for this radical new paper called The Bulletin. But people loved them. People absolutely loved them.
Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree.
Waltzing Matilda could have been our national anthem.
There was a referendum and it went pretty close, but we chose Advance Australia Fair instead. But, you know, when you see Australians overseas, whether it's at games or whatever, you know, people strike up Waltzing Matilda, and everyone knows that's Australia's song. The average person would probably prefer it, I reckon.
For Banjo, though, the song was nearly a scandal.
He was engaged to a young lady named Sarah Riley. They took a holiday to Dagworth in Western Queensland. And Sarah's closest friend, Christina McPherson, was there at the family station. And, well, look, you have to say Banjo and Christina hit it off. Probably a little too well, I suppose, is the kindest way to put it. One of the station workers told of seeing a swagman waltzing his Matilda down by the billabong, as in carrying a swag. And that stuck in Patterson's mind.
You come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Christina McPherson was quite an accomplished musician, and she'd heard a tune at the Warrnambool races in Western Victoria, and she started playing it. It was a marching tune, they call it. It's a tune we know today as Waltzing Matilda. The story goes that Banjo got really excited when he heard this tune being played. He said, "Oh no, I can write some words to that." So they sat down together and they composed this little song that I don't think either thought much of. And I think it was only a flirtation, but of course Banjo was engaged to Sarah Riley, and whatever happened was a step too far. And Christina's brothers angrily threw Patterson out of the station and ordered him never to return. He went away, I imagine, with his tail between his legs and with the words to this little song he'd written called Waltzing Matilda. Surely he can't have imagined the impact that song would have. He sold it later, the rights to it, for £5, and he said, "I sold some other old junk for that £5, and it was turned into an advertising ditty for Billy T."
Then there's the man from Snowy River. Banjo always said he came from lots of characters, but Paul thinks there was a man.
The man from Snowy River. He was real.
There's a wide school of belief, a fairly solid one, I think, that it was based on an old hermit called Jack Riley. Old Jack Riley used to love to tell a yarn about when he was a boy, how a valuable stallion escaped, and he galloped down the side of a mountain on his rough little pony to recapture this valuable stallion. We do know that Banjo Paterson rode up to Mount Kosciuszko and almost certainly spent the night at Jack Riley's hut and had a yarn with him.
The poem came out a few months later, and Jack's tombstone says he's the man. Banjo didn't just write poetry.
He was a war correspondent too.
Yeah, he was. It shows his sense of adventure, I think. He wasn't too content to sit around and let the world take place without him.
He was friends with Breaker Morant and went to South Africa to cover the Boer War.
He was there where the shells were going off and the rifle bullets were kicking up the dirt around him as he was galloping his horse through the battlefield. And he wrote some terrific accounts of this war.
He was 50 by World War I, but still went to Egypt to train horses for the cavalry.
Does he make you recite Banjo Paterson poems?
He likes telling us about all of his stories, but it's interesting.
Paul has inflicted a lot of stories on his young news team.
They roll their eyes and pretend to listen.
He's passing on Australian history.
Does anyone know how the man from Snowy River starts? There was movement at the... No?
No.
I love a sunburnt country, not
wrong.
banjo.
Wrong poet. But we do, but a wrong poet, yeah. Good try. I think if anybody personifies the reciting of Banjo's work, then I reckon Jack's your man. It's got to be Jack Thompson. He's the master, I think.
But I doubt he'd suit the office. Clancy of the Overflow.
Beautiful.
Jack does it well.
He does, but no, I reckon Paul Marshall should release an album of Banjo Paterson poems. You can hear it. He's the spiritual heir of Leonard Teal.
He wouldn't even need to try our Paul Marshall to do
I
that.
had written him a letter, which I had, for want of better knowledge, sent to where I met him down the Lachlan years ago.
You can hear it, can't you? Perfect.
Paul,
Thank you, Paul.
I'm on it.
Yeah, we're
Head
both on it.
Weekend Sunrise.